In 1981, legendary director John Carpenter introduced the world of cinema to the movie character icon Snake Plissken in the highly praised movie Escape from New York. Starring Kurt Russell as the lead role of Plissken, Escape from New York is a terrifying look into a dystopian world where Manhattan is now a dangerous prison zone, completely run by dangerous and violent criminal gangs and underground dwellers known as crazies. Where after Air Force One is hijacked and crash lands in New York, the president, played by Donald Pleasance, is taken hostage by a criminal gang led by the Duke, played by Isaac Hayes, in which it's up to no-nonsense criminal Snake Plissken to enter the forbidden and dangerous grounds of New York to save the president in return for his freedom. Snake Plissken, thanks to his tough persona and iconic eye patch, has become one of the most celebrated characters in John Carpenter's filmography, as it seems that people can't get enough of this quiet-spoken anti-hero in this suspenseful, action-packed and even creepy masterpiece. So of course it's time to get out the eye patches and put them on while looking all badass as we explore 10 things that you may not know about Escape from New York. And if you already knew them, then good on ya. That means you've got an excellent taste in films. So prepare to enter this dark and terrifying domain of 1997 New York as we attempt to escape this hellish realm. Let's do this.
What you doing in here with a gun, Snake?
Looking for somebody.
Who?
The president.
Number 10. The most iconic scene isn't in the movie. Okay, this is actually a well-known fact, but one that I still think is worth mentioning, as Escape from New York has a truly awesome poster featuring Plissken running through the streets of New York, where the head of the Statue of Liberty is behind him. It demonstrates that New York is so torn up and destroyed, even the Statue of Liberty itself has now become a heap of junk lying around the streets. I can remember seeing the poster for the first time and being so captivated by it, but then being slowly disappointed when watching the movie itself, never seeing the image of the Statue of Liberty head on the streets. But regardless, for better or worse, this iconic image would eventually be put onto film in the form of Cloverfield, in which a monster attacks New York City and the Statue of Liberty head is seen thrown down the streets. I like to think that that scene was put in to pay homage to the Escape from New York poster, for those who were disappointed in not seeing the imagery in said movie. Number 9. Snake Plissken is a real person. Well, sort of. You see, John Carpenter knew someone who he described as being a high school tough guy, who was actually called Snake Plissken, who even had a tattoo of a snake. Something that impressed Carpenter, and obviously left an impact on him, as when he was writing his script for Escape from New York, he decided to take inspiration from this high school tough guy, along with Snake Tattoo, and give the fictional character the name Snake Plissken. All I want to know is what high school did John Carpenter go to? In my high school, we didn't have students called Snake Plissken. We had students called Bob and Jeff and Jason and Bill and so on. Jason was pretty cool. Ironically, Wes Craven named Freddy Krueger after a kid he went to school with, so I guess the moral of the story is if you want your movie character to have impact and to be memorable, just name him after some guy you went to school with. Number 8. Plissken casting possibilities. So when the movie was in its early days of its production, the studio wanted either Chuck Norris or Tommy Lee Jones in the role of Snake Plissken. But Carpenter wasn't happy with either of those choices, as he felt that Norris was too old and Jones just wasn't right for the part. Carpenter always wanted Kurt Russell in the role, but the production team didn't want a bar of this now iconic action star, as back in the early days of 1981, Russell, oddly enough, was most well known for starring in Disney movies and having a cameo in an Elvis film. Speaking of which, just a few years prior, Carpenter cast Russell as Elvis in a made-for-TV movie that he directed, but the studio was still not convinced. However, Carpenter stuck to his guns and Russell became the face of Snake Plissken. And Russell not only would go on to work with Carpenter on several more projects, but Russell would actually go on to become one of the most recognisable action tough guys of the 80s and 90s. Number 7. Jamie Lee Curtis cameo. So okay, you can't actually see Jamie Lee Curtis, but you can hear her voice throughout the film, as the actor lends her voice to several narration scenes, particularly describing the security perimeter of the now prison grounds of New York City.
The Bank of the United States and its employees wish to thank you for allowing us to serve you.
Curtis had previously worked with Carpenter on the slasher masterpiece Halloween and The Fog, and I'm guessing the two must have gotten along really well, as Curtis would lend her voice to another Carpenter-related project, as 2 years later the Carpenter-produced Halloween 3 Season of the Witch would once again use Curtis's voice and can be heard in the movie calling out for a town curfew. And in both Halloween 3 and Escape from New York, Curtis puts on a creepy, monotone robotic voice, which really does actually and oddly sound authoritarian, so no wonder Carpenter kept having her back to lend her voice for these creepy, sinister voiceovers for his movies. Number 6. The script was written due to real-life political turmoil. Although Escape from New York was released in 1981, its roots actually go back many years earlier to 1974. Yes, even before Halloween was released, as back then Carpenter was starting to put his dirt and grime dystopian future story together. His motivation behind writing the script was meant to be a reflection on how people at that time no longer trusted the government, especially after the Watergate scandal. I guess to John Carpenter, Escape from New York is something of a cautionary tale of how the world might turn out if politicians misuse their power. So, yeah, when you watch Escape from New York, just imagine Donald Pleasance as Bald Nixon. This is more proof as to why you should never trust bald people. Except for me, of course, you should always trust me. Number 5. Kurt Russell keeps an eye out. As mentioned, one of the most iconic aspects of the character Snake Plissken is the eye patch. It makes the character look more badass, but also makes the character interesting in that it gives him more implied history. Like, you can tell this is a guy who has been to hell and back and been put through many dangerous situations. And the fact that he wears the eye patch also goes with the character's disgruntled attitude. However, the eye patch wasn't originally in the script, nor did John Carpenter come up with the idea of Plissken to be presented this way. In fact, it was entirely Kurt Russell's idea to give the character the iconic eyewear, of which it does make the character instantly recognisable. All I have to say is good call, Kurt Russell! Number 4. Recycled props. So of course the film crew couldn't actually go to New York and destroy the city in order to get the shots of a run-down and decaying looking New York. So in order for these shots to be accomplished, models of the city were built and used for filming, and to be honest, by 1981 standards, the model city looks pretty good, and was convincing and perfectly displays a hellish world. And yes, that is director James Cameron working on a matte painting of the city there. However, when filming wrapped up on Escape from New York, the model was then used for another well-known science fiction movie, Blade Runner. Yep, indeed, because the model looked so good on film, it was then given a new coat of paint and reused again for certain establishing shots of 2019 Los Angeles in Blade Runner. And I don't know why, but it just gives me so much joy knowing that the same prop was used for both Escape from New York and Ridley Scott's science fiction classic. So in other words, if you want to create a dark, creepy, dystopian future world, then this is the model for you. Number 3. Escape from New York was part of a 2-movie deal. After Halloween became a huge hit, John Carpenter was now in demand and teamed up with movie company Avco Embassy Pictures to do a 2-movie deal. Avco is an independent movie production company who over the years had brought out movies such as The Graduate, The Lion in the Winter, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Prom Night, Phantasm, Scanners, and This Is Spinal Tap. However, Avco had their own plans for Carpenter. They wanted him to direct the Philadelphia Experiment instead, but Carpenter had no interest in directing the time-traveling tale, and instead the 2 movies he made for Avco were The Fog and Escape from New York, completing his 2-picture deal. The next year, Carpenter shifted to Universal Pictures for his awesome gross-out puke fest, The Thing. The Philadelphia Experiment was eventually made, but in 1985 by New World Pictures. And everyone lived happily ever after. Or did they? Number 2. Alternative Beginning. The movie originally began with a sequence showing how Snake Plissken ended up in jail by showing a bank robbery gone wrong. Although the idea of starting the movie off with a bank robbery heist may have seemed awesome, I think the intricate nature of filming the robbery made it somewhat confusing, as test audiences couldn't quite figure out what was happening. So to ease the confusion, the scenes were simply removed, which I think was a wise move, as it didn't really have anything to do with the rest of the movie, as we could already figure out that Pliskin was an outlaw. And I guess for first-time viewers, the scene could have been confusing. Also, the movie basically would have started by seeing our main hero failing. That, and the shot starts with a comical robot with a really weird voice.
Attention. Banking hours are over.
Yeah, in my opinion, it was wise to remove the scene. Number 1, the movie wasn't actually shot in New York City. Despite the fact that the movie is called Escape from New York, none of the movie was actually shot in New York, except for a few aerial shots of the Statue of Liberty, of course. Nope, the movie was actually filmed in St. Louis, Missouri, on the account that St. Louis had several landscapes of run-down buildings due to a fire that took place several years earlier, which gave certain parts of the city a post-apocalyptic run-down look, which sat perfectly with the film's storyline and its tone and atmosphere. But regardless, I'm just glad the movie wasn't retitled to Escape from St. Louis, as that just wouldn't have had quite the same ring to it. Escape from New York was released in July 1981 and made $25.2 million on a $6 million budget. So for its budget, it was considerately successful. It got good reviews from critics too, who felt it was a strange and surreal world that is parallel to our own world, with an added touch of B-movie sensibilities. Although audiences may not have been jumping up and down with excitement when Escape from New York first came out, its lasting impression was something of a slow burner, with it going on to be seen more and more as a masterpiece with the passing of time. Something that tends to happen with Carpenter's movies, like The Thing and They Live. Escape from New York is classic Carpenter. It has intrigue and suspense as it explores a lone hero entering a terrifying world of what could be. Well guys, that about wraps up my look into Escape from New York. I hope you enjoyed it and got some great entertainment out of it, and maybe learnt a thing or two that you probably didn't already know, and maybe now feel motivated to go back and re-watch it, and if you haven't seen it, go and watch it right now! What are you doing? Just go and watch it! It's just one of those movies that just seems to resonate with everyone, and everyone seems to really love it. And yes, it is one of John Carpenter's most brilliant movies. Anyway, I'm Minty, and damn, is it just me or were the crazies really creepy? I didn't like them. See ya!